My parents treated me like a nanny in my own home. I was 15 when life at home got bad, but the signs were there way earlier. My parents always acted more like roommates with impulsive spending habits than responsible adults. They loved being fun. They threw themed parties for people we barely knew, got matching tattoos on a whim, and let me skip school for mental health days, which really meant they wanted me to babysit my siblings while they went on last-minute road trips. At the time, I had two younger brothers, Mikey 5 and Jordan 3. My mom worked part-time at a salon, and my dad bounced between warehouse jobs and entrepreneurial projects, which usually meant pyramid schemes or reselling. Junk online? Money was always tight, but they dressed like influencers and posted as if we were the Kardashians. Behind the phone screen, it was chaos. I'd come home from school to find my brothers still in pajamas, the kitchen a mess, and my mom in bed recovering from a long day. If I asked what happened, she'd sigh like I just couldn't understand adult stress. My dad would pat me on the back and say, "That's my girl. I knew you'd take care of things." By sophomore year, I was picking up the slack. I made dinner, gave baths, helped with homework, packed lunches, and handled bedtime stories. I even faked my mom's signature for school forms because if I didn't, they wouldn't get turned in. At first, I thought it was temporary. Maybe they were just overwhelmed. Maybe things would settle. But then I overheard them one night, laughing about how lucky they were that I was so mature and saved them thousands on daycare. That's when it hit me. This wasn't temporary. They planned this. They weren't stepping up because they never intended to. I tried talking to them about it once during midterms week. I had a major history exam the next morning and had barely slept because Jordan had been throwing up for 2 days. I asked, more like begged, them to take over for the night so I could study. Mom gave me a long look and said, "Honey, I'm not good with puke. You're better at this stuff anyway." I said, "I'm 15. I need to study. I'm falling behind in math. And..." She cut me off. "And we're doing our best. You don't know how hard adulthood is." Then my dad chimed in, "You're not even paying rent. You could be a little more grateful." Grateful? For what? For the rotting food in the fridge or the laundry I had to do at my friend's house because our washer broke 2 months ago and they hadn't fixed it? I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Then I took care of Jordan, cleaned up the mess, and pulled an all-nighter just to scrape by with a C+. I remember walking into school the next morning, utterly exhausted. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. I felt like I was watching my life from outside my body. My English teacher, Mrs. Levin, pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about allergies and ran off. But she knew. I think a lot of people knew. They just didn't know what to do. It really hit a boiling point a few weeks later. I was supposed to go on a weekend college tour trip with the school. I'd been so excited. It was going to be my first time seeing actual campuses, staying overnight in dorms, and meeting professors. I'd raised half the money myself by tutoring and doing chores for neighbors. The night before the trip, I had my suitcase packed. I even printed out a packing checklist. For a brief moment, I felt like a normal teenager. Then my mom came into my room holding her phone. "So, your dad's brother invited us to his lake house this weekend. We said yes. It's going to be so good for our mental health." I blinked. "Okay, so you're taking Mikey and Jordan?" She laughed. "No, silly. We want to actually relax. You'll stay with the boys. You're amazing with them." I stared at her. "Mom, I have a school trip. I already paid for it. I've been talking about this for weeks." Her smile faltered. "Sweetie, there will be other trips." "No, there won't," I said. "We don't even have college visits near here." This was it. She sighed. "Look, you can reschedule, okay? Be flexible. That's part of being an adult." That night, I cried myself to sleep next to my little brother who had peed the bed again. I cleaned it up before morning, canceled my spot on the trip, and texted my teacher a lie about a family emergency. My parents came home 3 days later, sunburned, hungover, and acting like they'd discovered inner peace. They didn't even ask how the weekend went. I stopped talking to them unless I had to after that. Something permanent shifted inside me. It wasn't just about the lost opportunities anymore. It was about what they were turning me into, a permanent replacement for themselves, a free laborer disguised as a daughter. I knew then that I needed a way out. But first, I needed to survive long enough to make it. The last time I ever tried, To explain my situation to someone, they told me I was lucky to have such a close family. I wasn't lucky. I was trapped, and I was getting close to my limit. Things at home didn't improve after the college trip disaster. If anything, they got worse. My parents became more entitled and more careless. They'd started treating me like a built-in co-parent they didn't even have to thank anymore. It all came to a head the week before finals. My parents announced they were going on a self-care retreat out of state. 4 nights, 5 days. Spa treatments, deep emotional healing, and wine tastings. They posted about it like they were influencers again, complete with a countdown and hashtags. I asked who would be watching Mikey and Jordan. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. You, obviously. You're so good with them. You'll be fine. I said, Mom, it's finals week. I have tests. You're smart. You'll manage, she said, waving her hand like I was being dramatic. When I told my dad I wasn't comfortable, being left alone with full parental responsibility for a week, he laughed and said, You've basically been doing it anyway. Don't act like this is new. And that was that. They left early Tuesday morning with 2 suitcases, an empty gas tank, and zero concern. By Wednesday afternoon, things were falling apart. Mikey came home from school complaining of a sore throat. Jordan had a fever and a wet cough that wouldn't stop. I gave them both medicine, kept them hydrated, and called our pediatrician's office, pretending to be my mom. They told me to bring them in the next day, so I skipped school Thursday. I walked both boys to the bus stop, rode with them across town, sat through an hour-long wait, and then dragged them home again, sweating, exhausted, and out of breath. They had strep. I picked up the antibiotics from the pharmacy and put it on my own debit card. My parents hadn't left a dime behind. I emailed my teachers explaining I had a family emergency and would be turning everything in late. Some were understanding. Others weren't. One of my classes gave me a 0 for a group project I missed. Friday morning, I woke up with a sore throat and a pounding head. I couldn't even stand without feeling like I might collapse, but I had to get the boys up, fed, medicated, and entertained. So I did. I don't remember falling asleep, but I do remember waking up to Jordan crying in the kitchen. He'd tried to pour his own cereal and spilled milk everywhere. Mikey was trying to mop it up with paper towels, looking terrified. I'm sorry, Jordan sobbed. You were sleeping and I didn't want to wake you. Something in me cracked. Right then. It was guilt. Because they were just little kids trying to survive with someone who shouldn't have been responsible for them in the first place. I hugged them both and promised them everything would be okay. Even though I had no idea if it would be, my parents returned Saturday night like royalty returning to their palace. They walked in, dropped their bags, and looked around. What happened? In here? My mom asked, wrinkling her nose. It smells like chicken soup and bleach. My dad added, We told you to keep the place decent, not turn it into a hospital. I was too tired to scream and too hurt to cry. I just stared at them and said, The boys had strep. I got sick. You didn't leave money. I missed finals. They blinked at me, completely unfazed. Then my mom shrugged and said, Well, if your school can't be flexible, that's their fault. We all make sacrifices. And my dad said, Honestly, you're being dramatic. You're always playing the victim lately. Suddenly I realized they didn't care if I failed. They didn't care if I broke down. As long as I kept the house running, nothing else mattered. That night, I pulled out a notebook and wrote down everything I could remember. Every time I'd skipped school, every time I forged a signature, every medical appointment I handled, every grocery receipt I paid for, every moment they left me, alone with 2 kids under 10 while they partied, drank, or recharged their mental health. I took photos of the mess they'd leave. I started calling it my emergency file, because I knew one day I was going to need it. From that point on, I stopped trying to get them to change. Instead, I started planning my escape. I got a part-time job under the table at a local diner saying I needed college savings. I hid most of the money in a shoebox under my bed and stored the rest digitally in a Venmo account tied to a friend's number. I researched scholarships and financial aid options on school computers. I talked to counselors during lunch when I knew my parents wouldn't find out. I quietly built up a support system. My best friend Natalie and her mom became my lifeline. They knew things were rough at home. I just didn't tell them how bad until later. I stopped sharing anything personal with my parents. I started copying important documents and hiding them in a folder in my locker at school. I wasn't sure when I'd leave, but I knew it had to be soon. Senior year was supposed to be a countdown to freedom. Instead, it felt like slow suffocation. By then, I had fully stepped into the role of a third parent, only without the authority, respect, or acknowledgement that comes with it. My parents had practically retired from parenting altogether. They started referring to me as the built-in babysitter when talking to friends. They meant it as a joke, but I didn't laugh. My daily life was a tightrope walk between school, part-time work, and caring for Mikey and Jordan, who were now 7 and 5. If I wasn't making dinner, I was checking homework. If I wasn't checking homework, I was giving baths or folding laundry. If I wasn't doing any of that, I was figuring out how to afford toothpaste. I didn't go to dances. I didn't have time for clubs. I didn't date. I didn't hang out after school unless I knew the boys were being watched, which usually meant not at all. But I had a plan. I had one shot, college. I got into a university out of state. It wasn't Ivy League, but it was solid. I'd qualified for a partial scholarship and was waiting to hear about the rest of my financial aid. I didn't tell my parents right away. I wasn't sure how they'd react. When the acceptance letter came, I finally worked up the nerve. We were sitting at dinner, one of the rare nights they actually joined us at the table. I took a deep breath and said, I got into college, out of state, and I got a scholarship. They looked up from their phones. Mom smiled. That's cute, but who's going to take care of the boys? I blinked. What? Dad nodded like this was a reasonable follow-up. We were thinking you'd probably stay local. Maybe do community college part-time? Be home for the kids? Wait, I said. You expected me to turn down a full-time college education to stay here and keep being your unpaid nanny? Don't be so dramatic, Mom said, already scrolling again. We just assumed you'd want to stay close to your family. We need… You hear? My stomach dropped. You need me? Or the boys need me? She didn't answer. From that moment on, things between us were ice cold. I started making calls to my financial aid office in secret. I arranged for student housing, started researching what I needed to take with me, and set a personal deadline: move out the week after graduation. Graduation day came around, one of the biggest days of my life. I had a cap and gown, a decorated mortarboard, and a speech prepared. I wasn't valedictorian, but I'd been chosen to speak on behalf of the senior class. I reminded my parents of the date 3 times. Wrote it on the calendar, even gave them tickets. I looked for them in the crowd as I stood on stage. I scanned every row, but they weren't there. After the ceremony, my classmates hugged their parents, posed for photos, and handed off bouquets. I stood alone near the edge of the parking lot, clutching my diploma, trying not to cry. My best friend Natalie came running up, gave me a hug, and immediately asked, "Where's your mom? Where's your dad?" I just said, "They couldn't make it." Natalie's mom took one look at me and pulled me into a hug that lasted too long, but was exactly what I needed. "You did this on your own," she whispered. "You got yourself here. Be proud of that." Later that night, I came home to find my parents on the couch watching TV, takeout containers in front of them. I walked in wearing my cap and gown, holding my diploma. They looked up. "Oh," Mom said. "How was it?" I just stared at her. "You forgot," she shrugged. "We thought it was next weekend." "You had one thing to do," I said. My voice cracked. "One," Dad waved a hand. "You made it, didn't you? It's not like we missed anything important." That was it. I knew then I wasn't just leaving, I was disappearing. Over the next few weeks, I moved in silence. I packed what I could in boxes and bags, stored things at Natalie's house, and finalized everything with my school. On the surface, I acted normal. I still cooked, cleaned, and did bedtime stories. But inside, I was done. One night, while my parents were out, I tucked Mikey and Jordan into bed and kissed them goodnight like always. Then I sat on the floor outside their room and cried for an hour. I wasn't abandoning them. I was escaping the people who turned me into a substitute mother and forgot I was their daughter. A few days later, I left a note on the kitchen table saying, "I'm leaving for college. I'm not coming back. You can figure it out from here. You raised me to be responsible, just not for you." Then I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I thought the hardest part would be walking out that door. Turns out it was everything that came after. For the first time in my life, I was allowed to live for me. Not as a stand-in parent, not as the emotional cushion between chaos and children. Just a person, a student, a girl with a life ahead of her. Natalie's family let me crash with them for 2 weeks before college housing opened up. Her mom even helped me buy secondhand dorm essentials. It wasn't much, but it felt like freedom. When move-in day finally came, I sat on the edge of my dorm bed, staring at my small corner of the world and whispering, "You made it." No one had dragged me there. No one was waiting for me to make dinner or clean up a mess or wipe a nose. For the first time since I was 10 years old, I could breathe without checking on someone else first. I didn't tell my parents where I'd gone. I didn't answer their texts or return their calls. I blocked them on everything. They didn't deserve to know where I was, at least not yet. It took them 3 weeks to really panic. I guess they thought I was bluffing. That I'd come back once I cooled off or realized how much they needed me. I think they were so used to me doing everything that they couldn't imagine functioning without me. That illusion shattered fast. I started getting frantic voicemails. My mom sobbed into the phone, saying I was tearing the family apart. My dad tried to guilt-trip me with, "You think this is easy for us? We don't have backup. You left us in the lurch." One message even said, "We could get evicted if you don't come back and help with bills." I hadn't even realized how bad their financial situation was. But here's the thing. I didn't care anymore. I had warned them for years. I had cried, begged, and sacrificed every part of myself to make things work. But they ignored me. Now they could face the consequences. Then, I got a call I didn't expect. It was a caseworker from Child Protective Services. Apparently, someone had reported the boys being left home alone. A neighbor saw Mikey wandering outside with no shoes on while Jordan was crying inside. No adult in sight. It wasn't the first time, either. The caseworker asked if I could confirm that I used to live there and had been responsible for the children. I told her the truth. I told her about the years I raised them alone, the neglect, the missed appointments, the gaslighting, and the fact that I had left because I was the parent in that house and I couldn't be anymore. She asked if I'd be willing to speak further or even help. I paused and then said, "Only if it helps the boys." I spent the next few weeks juggling my first semester of college and meetings with social workers. I gave them copies of everything in my emergency file. Photos, screenshots, journal entries, school letters, and even text messages from my parents. The social worker looked overwhelmed. "You documented everything," she said. "I had to," I replied. No one believed me before. Apparently, the report wasn't the first one. There had been a few anonymous tips over the years, but nothing stuck. Without visible bruises or violence, no one took it seriously. But now there was real danger. The boys had been left alone multiple times. The house was in disarray. No groceries, no working stove. The internet turned off due to unpaid bills. Mikey had missed school 3 times that month. Jordan was showing signs of severe anxiety. They were being neglected, and I wasn't there to catch them anymore. One night, the caseworker called me directly. "We've removed Mikey and Jordan from the home temporarily, but your parents are contesting it. They say it's all lies and that you're making this up to punish them." I felt a cold fury in my chest. "They abandoned their responsibilities years ago," I said. "They don't get to play the victims now." The caseworker paused. "We need someone stable to take temporary custody. It can be a short-term thing, just until the court makes a final decision." My heart dropped. "I'm in college," I said quietly. "I have a tiny dorm room. I barely make enough for myself." "I understand. It's just, you're the only adult who's ever really looked after those boys." I didn't say yes right away. I didn't say anything. I sat on the edge of my bed again, staring at the cinder block wall, tears running silently down my face. I had escaped, but the kids hadn't. I called Natalie's mom. We talked for over an hour. She offered to help, saying we could work something out together, maybe even get her officially listed as a foster placement if needed. It was the first time I'd ever heard someone want to help. Eventually, I called the caseworker back. "I'll do it," I said. "But not permanently, just until it's safe." 2 days later, I met the boys in a supervised center. They came running across the room the second they saw me. Jordan clung to my leg and wouldn't let go. Mikey asked, "Are we coming with you now?" I nodded. They both started to cry, and so did I. That night, we stayed at Natalie's house. She and her mom gave the boys bunk beds, hot meals, and warmth they hadn't felt in a long time. We weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in years, we weren't alone. It's surreal how quickly your life can shift from being invisible to being center stage. One month, I was a college freshman hiding in my dorm, trying to shrink myself small enough to finally live without responsibility. The next, I was back in court buildings, surrounded by social workers and legal terms, advocating for the two kids I'd practically raised, while I still wasn't old enough to legally drink. Mikey and Jordan moved in temporarily with Natalie's family while the courts sorted things out. I stayed there most weekends, still juggling college and work, but I didn't miss a single night call, bedtime story, or school pickup when I could help it. Every day I woke up a little angrier at my parents and a little more determined to protect the boys. I wasn't scared of them anymore. The court process was exhausting. The first hearing was for temporary custody. My parents showed up dressed like they were attending brunch, not a custody battle. My mom had a white dress, stilettos, and her hair in some huge blowout. My dad wore sunglasses inside and spent most of the time muttering about how the system was rigged against fathers. When the judge asked about their involvement with the boys, their answers were paper thin. "We love them so much," my mom said with a pout. "We're just going through a hard time right now," my dad chimed in. "They were never in danger. It's just exaggeration. Our daughter's trying to punish us because we didn't fund her college dreams. That's..." When the judge asked me to speak, I stood up, hands shaking, and pulled out my binder. It was thick with records of every day I'd missed school to care for the boys, every receipt I'd paid for, every text my parents sent when they bailed or pushed their responsibilities on me, and medical records I handled. I even had a calendar that I'd kept with my handwriting marking, "Doctor appointment for Jordan." Mikey has asthma refill. Dad no-showed again. I ended with screenshots of social media posts my mom made from traveling while I was homesick taking care of her children. The judge's eyebrows rose higher with every page. My parents tried to spin it. "She's lying," Mom said, suddenly switching tactics. "She's always been dramatic. She has a flair for making things up." "She's brainwashed," Dad added. Her little friend's mom turned her against us. That backfired badly, because Natalie's mom had also submitted a written statement and she'd fostered the boys temporarily. She outlined exactly what condition the kids were in when they arrived: malnourished, behind on vaccinations, and Jordan was still wetting the bed nightly from stress. Then the CPS worker added her own report: 2 confirmed instances of the boys being left home alone with no food in the fridge, rotting trash bags on the floor, a broken smoke detector, and Mikey trying to cook a grilled cheese alone with a pan and a lighter. The judge called it what it was: chronic neglect. After that hearing, my parents stormed out without a word to me. But I wasn't done. There was still the matter of long-term custody. The court gave me 2 choices: become their legal guardian, or approve a foster family until a permanent placement was found. Natalie's mom offered to step up if I couldn't, and I almost let her. But then I looked at Mikey, sitting on the couch doing homework next to me, and Jordan curled up at my side, and I knew I couldn't walk away, even if I was still building my own life, because they didn't ask for any of this either. They were kids, just like I'd been, and they deserved a chance to feel safe and wanted. So I applied for temporary guardianship, legal custody with a support plan. I found a job on campus that paid more and applied for emergency student housing exceptions. I took night classes so I could be with the boys more during the day. Natalie's family helped where they could. A few of my professors even bent the rules to give me flexibility. And for the first time, the boys started to heal. Mikey began making friends again and got into reading. Jordan started sleeping through the night without panic. They both called me Sissy most of the time, but one night Jordan slipped and said, "Mom," then immediately gasped and said, "Sorry." I hugged him and said, "It's okay, I know what you meant." The final court date came 3 months later. This time, my parents didn't even show. Not because they didn't know, but because they knew they'd lost. I was granted full legal guardianship until I turned 25, at which point the boys would be old enough to decide for themselves where they wanted to stay. The judge looked me in the eye and said, "You've shown more responsibility, planning, and care than many people twice your age. These children are lucky to have you." That night, the three of us had a little celebration: cheap pizza, store-brand cupcakes, and a dance party in our shared apartment. I used to think that freedom meant distance, that if I could just get far enough away from the house I grew up in, the pain would disappear behind me like dust in a rearview mirror. But the truth is, distance only works when you've made peace with what you're leaving behind. And I wasn't at peace. Not until I made sure my parents could never hurt me or my brothers again. Life after the custody decision was better, but still hard. We weren't in survival mode anymore, but we weren't coasting either. I was balancing classes, a job, and two growing boys who needed me in 1,000 invisible ways. Mikey eventually started asking deeper questions. One night, after dinner, Mikey asked, "Why didn't Mom and Dad want us?" I knelt beside him and said, "It's not that they didn't want you. It's that they didn't know how to be parents. And they didn't want to try." It wasn't the full truth, but it was all he could carry at once. Word got out about what had happened. Not because I shared it, but because people noticed the boys weren't with my parents anymore. And in a town like ours, silence is suspicious. Eventually, one of my old classmates reached out to say my parents were telling people I stole the kids and lied to get free housing. At first, I ignored it. But then I saw a post my mom made on Facebook. A long, passive-aggressive screed about losing everything because of betrayal and how you should never trust your own blood. She didn't name me directly, but she tagged her old friends and even had pictures of the boys cropped with crying emojis. That was my limit. I decided to make a post of my own. For those who've asked or heard rumors, yes, I have full custody of my brothers. Yes, our parents lost custody. Yes, it was for a reason. I was their primary caregiver for years while still a minor. I missed school to raise them. I gave up opportunities. I was left alone with sick toddlers while they went on vacations. They didn't lose their children because I lied. They lost them because I told the truth. Then I logged off. A week later, my mom texted me, "I can't believe you'd humiliate us like this." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "I can't believe you made me your babysitter and called it love." Then I blocked her again. This time, permanently. One day recently, Jordan asked, "Do we have to go back to Mom and Dad when we're grown up?" I looked him right in the eyes and said, "You never have to go anywhere, you're not safe." Then I tucked him in, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway for a minute, just breathing. Because it still hits me sometimes that I'm the adult now. That this life we're building isn't borrowed. It's real. They raised me to be responsible. They just never imagined I'd use that responsibility to walk away from them and protect what they threw away.